your weekly content rundown to wind down the work week. There's a lot of work weeks. We'll get there. I think I might need a little bit more coffee this one. But we don't have Patrick with us today. We actually have Jared. He's making a celebrity appearance for us. So,
Prodigal son.
and of
That's right.
course, what else would we talk about with Jared here other than philosophy? So I'm going to go ahead and hand over our topic today to him so he can break down our article.
Yeah, so thank you. It's good to be back. We are a software company. We have engineers, and I found this. Of course, I'm always looking for fun crossover topics, and so there's a Harvard Business Review article called "Why Engineers Should Study Philosophy," and basically it's gosh, I've already forgotten the author's name. One second, I've got it pulled up over here. Marco Argenti. He's the chief information officer at Goldman Sachs. So it's a little startup bank. He runs up all the information stuff over there. So I have high hopes that they'll do well. But he's written this article, and he basically was talking to his daughter, and he's like, "Listen, if you're going to be an engineer, you should study philosophy." And then he goes on to give like his reasons and justifications for why that's the case. I am not going to say what I think his reasons and justifications are. I have some thoughts about this, but I don't want to skew at all what Casey's going to say, because Casey is the actual engineer here. And so I'm curious. I'm not an engineer, but so I'm curious what Casey's thoughts were as he read through this as an engineer, who is also a tinkerer and lover of all things knowledgeable and all things knowledge.
So I felt that there was two main points to this article. One was that building abstract models in your head is really important, and philosophy can help you build abstract models. And then the other one is, in the age of AI, being an engineer, communication, especially communication with AIs, is becoming more and more important. So the idea being that philosophy would help you build better models in your brain about the things that you're building, and then better communicate them to the AIs that are ultimately going to be writing the code for you, because engineers are not going to be writing code in the future.
Wasn't that point that he it was super quick and he didn't expound on it, and it almost became an assumption. You're not going to write code as an engineer in the future. What you're going to do is you're going to check code.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make sure that the model produces the code that adheres to whatever the AI model is going to produce code that you have come up with this idea in your mind. You just better get real good at prompting it. And to do that, you need to understand how to think about these things specifically. And he didn't expound on this either. There were probably 6 points that I wanted him to expound on, and he didn't. But one of them was, he says, you need to be able to understand the why before you implement the how. I mean, as a philosopher, of course I agree with this, but Casey, tell us from your perspective as an engineer, why is that point important? Why do you think it's important to him as an engineer?
So I agree with the things that he says are like the areas that you need to be good at in the now and in the future for engineering.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if philosophy gets you there quicker than something else. I think there's a whole philosophical discussion about whether or not training in a discipline that's different from your main discipline will improve your skill faster than just doing your main discipline more. And so I find that interesting. Certainly you need to build good mental models. Certainly that's going to be important. The closer your mental model is, the better your attempt is going to be. You're always going to need to refine it. At least, in the next decade or so, there's going to be a lot of refinement, because there's a lot of unknowns that you don't know about. But is it better to train in another discipline to gain those skills? I think this could be applied to technical writing too. Why is philosophy something that technical writers have to build mental models about the thing that they're building? They're constructing an information experience that has a model. Mm-hmm. So could this same thing be applied to technical writers? Should technical writers go learn philosophy?
I mean, you're making the case that everyone should obviously make, which is everybody needs to study philosophy, of course. So one thing, just to because I'm a philosopher and I like to be nitpicky about everything, he didn't say study philosophy instead of engineering. So he didn't say train in philosophy instead of becoming an engineer. He said you supplement your engineering with that, because philosophy is what's gonna help you dissect ideas and concepts to then ask the right questions. He didn't go into too much detail about the whole asking the right question thing either, although I think that's exceptionally important. That philosophy is good at helping you to ask the incisive questions that need to be asked, and that somebody might be overlooking, because Ren, not that you and I have ever gotten into any arguments about anything, but how many times have we talked and you like make a couple of statements and I'm like, well, hold on, and I like mentally like force the statements apart, and I'm like, here are 3 things in between them, which one do you want? And it drives Ren bonkers when I do this.
Yeah, I'm like triggered just talking about it. Like, it is so annoying. But I mean, ultimately, like, I will give you the unfortunate kudos that like it does like we do come away from whatever we're talking about much clearer because you do.
Yeah. Another thing he didn't go into at all in here is like, what areas of philosophy should you study? Is it just general study? He doesn't talk about that at all. So I'm going to make some recommendations on Marco's behalf. One, you need to study symbolic logic, because it will be those models, and you get to strip away all the meaning, and all you're going to deal with is letters and rules. So in some sense, you're working with in a code-like experience, and there's direct correlation between like working in different types of logical systems and learning those systems and how to manipulate them and work in them, that allows like the same type of creativity that engineers tell me they have. Again, I don't know these things. And then also one thing that he hints at too, he actually says this, the quote that stuck out to me is when he's talking about AI and an engineer's ability to assess, to prompt well and then assess outputs. He said, as we know, AIs can make mistakes, and they're particularly good at making incorrect outputs seem plausible, making the ability to discern truth another hugely important skill. As part of that, then symbolic logic can play a role, but symbolic logic is just a framework. They're frameworks and systems for implications and entailments. Epistemology is going to become really important. So, and that's going to be the simple like study of like, how do you know things, and what are justified beliefs, and why do you have knowledge when you do have it? And then further, like, what is knowledge? All that stuff is going to become very important. And then also, I think metaphysics, like just studying, doing some like ontology work, like what exists, start doing that. It's the same type of classification work that a taxonomist is going to do in our space. You're going to do some of that stuff when you're writing code too. Like, we're all doing these things all the time. And the question is, how good are we at them? Like, everybody's asking questions. Everyone's building mental models. Everybody's trying to evaluate whether they know something, whether it's justified to believe something. Everyone's thinking about what exists and what doesn't exist. The question is, how good are you at it? And philosophy is a really good supplement for any of the other majors, because it's going to make you good at those things.
I think that's really interesting, because like if you were going to university to study computer science, you take a lot of, more programming focused courses, but relate to logic and discrete mathematics and things like that. And so I wonder, like, there's potentially a lot of developers and a lot of writers and other disciplines where they can just hack their way through it, and it's kind of a brute force approach. But going and studying one of these areas might be a way to expand your thought process and your inquisitiveness and your critical thinking in a way that you wouldn't get when you're just constantly focusing on one particular problem. So that's the area that I think is interesting here. I still have a huge question about whether or not, like, it's worth going and training, even as a separate thing, a separate endeavor that's like a side thing, like maybe dedicate 10-20% of your time. We're training something like that versus just hammering on the same type of problems over and over. Like, it's a big question in sports, like cross training. It's a big question for like my judo students and things like that. So it's interesting. It feels like it applies to almost any discipline, not just for your professional career. How focused should you be?
Yeah. I mean, if we want to like take the analogy, so this was like 2 years ago or so, I finally, for the first time ever, this wasn't a thing when I first started climbing, but it has become more of a thing recently. I hired a climbing coach to like help me like advance physically. Like he wasn't there to really assess like any of the existing skill sets I had. It was like all about fitness. And the
Hmm.
first thing he did with me was he was like, all right, we're going to do an assessment. It's going to take an hour and a half. And I'm just going to put you through some different exercises. And that'll help me assess where you are. And then I'm going to build a plan around that, around your weaknesses. And he didn't call them weaknesses because he's a nice guy. But that's effectively what he did. He noticed everywhere that I was weak and could be stronger. And then he built non-climbing workouts around those muscle groups to help me then develop more as a climber. And like, dude, there were a couple of things that have happened climbing wise where I'm like, didn't think that was possible, because I'd been climbing for 28 years and never could do that particular move. He gave me, took about 6 months, and then I was like, oh no, I was just not strong in that area in that way.
So do you think that if you, instead of doing those other exercises, if you had just set up a wall with that move and just practice that move over and over, do you think that you would achieve being able to do it faster than going and doing different exercises to build those muscle groups?
So the difference would be that I probably could have gotten good at the particular move, but and that's because I would train that particular move. But with having a more general fitness plan, it has allowed me to execute that move and similar moves in the same, like that use the same muscle groups without having to train in particular for that move. So I could train generally. And I think the analog here would be for philosophy is like, if you expose yourself to these ways of thinking, philosophers have very, very particular ways of thinking about things. If you expose yourself to these ways of thinking about things, which will be atypical to how you normally do it, then you will have a broader skill set and range available to you that you can apply to lots of problems, not just the particular ones.
That's really interesting. And something, now there's so many sites that have courses on these things, like Brilliant and other sites where they're relatively affordable. And so someone can go and they can dabble in this, without having to go to, register for a university or something like that.
Also, so I'm going to make a plug here, but it's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's a website. It's plato.stanford.edu. It's all of the articles are written by professional philosophers, and it's free, and they are exceptional. That's like, if there's ever a new area of philosophy that I want to dip my toes into the water, that's the first place I go, and I'll read the overview there. And at the bottom, they have a huge bibliography. And then you can just start going from there and get more detailed. But it's a great spot. They also have topics like what is information, which I didn't bring up today, but that's something that is always on my mind. But they'll do a lot of stuff like non-traditional, at least in academic philosophy things. So like, what is information? They'll talk about things like AI. Like they have modern stuff up there too, which is really fun. It's a broad range of topics.
Sometime we need to do a redo on this and talk about how do you think your experience working at Heretto would have been different if you didn't come from a background in philosophy. Don't have time, but that would be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about
that. Thoughts.
Well, next time Patrick is out, we'll placeholder for that.
So next week we're doing it. Burn.
Recorded. That is recorded. That is actually a great way to end this show. We ended it right on time, which is beautiful. I hope everyone has a really great weekend. And as always, you can find this on our podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. All right. Bye, y'all. Have a great week.